operate the bioreactor. Again, we have a set of references that you can look at if you, let's say you get an interview at a biotechnology company and you're going to be doing fermentation. I would urge you to check some of these references. But at a very minimum, you should find very useful the book that you use for Chemi 192. Okay, if you want to know more about bugs, this book, Essential Cell Biology, is really good. And this is an older book, but it has a lot of really useful information about it. It has a lot of analytical information about different kinds of bacteria and different processes and how to scale things up. So if you're ever interested in that, this is also a good book. Okay, so we are going to talk about the different aspects of setting up and running a bioreactor. These are some of the things that are really important, like the inoculation train. I'm calling this batch record, but really it's what is important for you to document and keep track of in your process before, during, and after. And also how to sample. Okay, and then I'm also going to present a broad overview of media types, but I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, because I think it's more important for us to just focus on the actual process and not get bogged down in making a very complicated media. So we also will talk about sterilization, the difference between a batch and a fed batch bioreactor, and we are going to use a linear feed. I'll mention the other types so that you know what they are, and there's different purposes for using them, but we are going to use a linear feed. Okay, so this is the bioreactor, and this is all the things that you will find in the bioreactor. Our bioreactor is glass. We do have a dissolved oxygen probe. We have a sampling tube that looks very much like this. An impeller that's it's on the end of a stick, and it stirs the bioreactor. Sparger that has holes in it, and it will allow it's the port for sending the air into the bioreactor. The pH probe, temperature probe, and then the rest of the stuff. I think I talked about some of these things in the control lecture, so you've probably already seen this. Okay, so the big picture is the purpose of the bioreactor is to create an environment where the cells can grow, but it's not just about the cells living happily ever after. It's about them producing a product that you want them to produce. So you may not choose the best circumstances for the bugs in their goals, but you have your own goals, which are a product. So this is important to try to know how to manage that bioreactor so that you get your goal from the bioreactor. Very important is to maintain a pure culture of the organism. To do so, if you are working with a wild-type organism, this is much more challenging than if you are using a recombinant organism. Why is that the case? Because in a wild-type organism, there's generally not any type of antibiotic resistance in the organism, so you have to be very careful not to get your process contaminated. But in our case, we are going to use a recombinant organism, and therefore we can use an antibiotic. The bugs that we're going to use have a plasmid in them, and it has a gene on the plasmid that confers antibiotic resistance. And so we will put some antibiotic in the bioreactor, so everything in the bioreactor that doesn't have that plasmid in it will die. So that makes our life much easier. Okay, so we already talked about stimulating the production of your desired product, and to do so, you may find that there's an optimum value of pH, an optimum feed strategy, an optimum temperature, and an optimum dissolved oxygen for the maximum product formation. So these are things that you would find. We are not going to get so complicated. You're going to be able to run one fermentation and determine what the product formation is. There's not going to be any real optimization going on. Okay. Oops, I went backwards. Okay. Okay, so the first thing that I'll mention is the inoculation train. So what is the inoculation train? We are going to start your fermentation from a 1 milliliter frozen stock. And this is going to be used to inoculate a flask, and the flask is going to be used to inoculate your bioreactor. So if you are doing a 130,000 gallon fermentation like they do at ADM or Cargill, then this inoculation training is going to have more steps in it. Obviously, you don't need to do that, but think about how when you start from a finite amount of bugs and they reproduce, and then they reproduce, and then they reproduce. So every time the bugs reproduce, you may impact the outcome of your process. So that's why the inoculation training must be done. It must be determined, it must be consistent, and it's very important for a very large-scale process. All right. So even in our case, I also experienced, I was late one day and I had to inoculate the bioreactor. I thought, well, I'll just put a little bit extra inoculum in it and it won't have to reproduce as many times. Well, interestingly, I got much less product doing that. So even in our small-scale case, it makes a difference how you set up the inoculation of your bioreactor. So the amount is considered to be safe at about 4%. I think that's on one of these slides. I thought it was on the previous slide, but it's not. So we may run into it again. All right, so, oops, I know what I did. I went backwards. Okay, here we go. There it is. Okay, for 1 ml of frozen culture, all right, we're going to inoculate a flask. The rule of thumb is about 4% of the inoculation to volume of fresh media. Okay. And then we are going to do the same thing, about 4%, to go from our flask into our bioreactor. That inoculation of the bioreactor will happen the morning of the day that you run your bioreactor. I always invite people to come and see that process if you want to participate, but I can't require you to come because you may have other classes or work or whatever. But if you want to come and see it, that's probably the most challenging part of running a bioreactor, is getting it set up and doing the inoculation, and after that you can kind of sit back and put your feet up and every couple of hours take a sample. All right. So, okay, one of the things here is when you grow your inoculum, you want to pay attention that you avoid things like, this is called a pH excursion, where if you leave it too long, the pH is going to go down and the bugs are going to have been exposed to a strong acid pH. That may affect your large-scale process. You don't want to leave it sitting on a counter, okay?